Okay, so here we are at the Swinging Vine Zoo, and today we are going to be working on the tapir habitat. For this habitat, I wanted to change things up and create a space where the tapirs could go into their shelter, but it looked more like a forest because I had looked into just how naturally the tapirs get shelter. And what I found out is they just kind of bed down in heavily treed areas or underneath brush or bushes in the woods. So I started by just first obviously sending the tapirs to the trade center and then just moving all of the pieces out, and I just plunked them down over in an open space so that I could easily grab them and put them back in after I was done. And then I basically flattened the terrain so I could start with terrain because I learned in my lemur land rebuild that it's really tricky to work with the terrain, and it's just good to have that all set first. So I started with that, flattened the terrain, and then started working on the water area. I had a lot of trouble with this area. You can see in this speed build that I go back to it several times and try to rework it. I think that one of the big problems was that because this path was here, even though it was raised up, it was still interfering with the terraforming. So I still wasn't able to get the land the way that I wanted it underneath. And then on the other side, you can see there are some the barriers there. Now, I didn't think that the barriers, the concrete barriers, interfered with terraforming. So I think there's something else going on in there. Um, maybe maybe there's null barriers in the background for the other habitat or something, because I know that they really do interfere with the terraforming. So then after I got the water all kind of set the way that I wanted, I started putting in the concrete barriers around under the pathway so that they would kind of look like supports for the pathway as well as act as a barrier for the habitat. But you can see here that I just completely deleted the pathway and started to remake that area again because the water was still not really working out the way that I wanted it to. I spent a lot of time working and reworking this water area in the tapir habitat. It finally did, I think, turn out kind of the way that I wanted. I was happy with it in the end anyway. Maybe not, it didn't turn out maybe the way that I had envisioned originally, but I was happy with the final product. So I put the paths back in, but it was actually really, really risky to do that because the paths can be so tricky that if I, deleted that section, did some work, and then tried to put the section back in, the paths might not have behaved the way that I originally had them. And in this case, they actually did go back almost the way they originally were. So I was pretty lucky, and I just had to move a little bit of the railing work that I had done on the top already. Um, but otherwise, they did pretty much go back to where they were. So I was lucky with that. So then after that, I just started to work on these stone walls that create this natural kind of barrier for the habitat and also look like support for the bridge that goes over top of the habitat and the raised section that goes around one side. And I really liked them. They look pretty neat. The old stonework. So I thought they really suited kind of a bridge look, and the archways underneath the bridge that the tapirs can then swim under to go into that second section of their habitat. So I just carried the rock work through on this side too. I didn't really realize as I started what a big project that was going to be, because then afterwards I also needed to carry on the rock walls, or the stone walls, I mean, on the other side of that raised pathway as well. And each one needed to be adjusted and rotated just right so that it lined up with the ones beside it and it was sitting just right underneath a raised pathway. So it was actually quite a lot of work to get that done as well. After that, I moved on to creating their hard shelter. And my concept for this hard shelter was to make it look like a foresty area. So I started with the mud walls so that they would kind of blend in to the background of the um, bushes and plants and trees that I used and not really stand out too much. And I ended up covering most of it anyway, but wherever it does peek through, it still kind of looks natural. Then after I got this set where I wanted it to, I used the advanced move tool so that I could kind of rotate them onto an angle so they would sit on top of that roof a bit better. At this point, I'm not really liking the hard shelter. And in the end, though, when I add more trees and shrubbery around it, I think it ends up looking not too bad. So I really took a risk there with the hard shelter as well because I didn't check beforehand to see if it was going to be big enough for the two tapirs. And luckily, once I got them back into their habitat, it was big enough because that would have been a little bit frustrating to have to go back to that and expand it. So luckily, again, I lucked out on a few things with this habitat. Um, the size of the habitat itself is just big enough for the tapirs. I was able to get that path back in after deleting it, and the size of the shelter is just big enough for the tapirs. So yeah, because working within the confines of this path that I had already built was really tricky, and so I really lucked out that it actually all worked out really great. So I really like using these rocks around the perimeter as a natural element in their habitat and also just as a natural barrier. I do like to spend a little bit of time fiddling with those, twisting and turning them, rotating them, raising them, lowering them until they look just right. So I'm going back now and just deleted that concrete barrier and starting to add some more of the rocks to make a natural barrier on this side of the habitat. And I think that ended up looking a lot better. I am going to try in the future to use as much natural material for habitat barriers as I can because I think it really does add a lot to the overall aesthetic of the habitat. Here I'm taking some of those larger rocks and just sinking them below the surface of the water and rearranging them so they kind of look like steps. So even though the tapirs don't need steps to get out of the water, I was imagining that this side would be kind of more steep and they would need to use these rock steps to get out of the water. After that, I just wanted to kind of decorate the habitat with some terrain paint. At this point, I don't know what tapirs need for or would prefer for terrain type, but I just was kind of imagining where they might walk, and so putting some darker soil in those areas that kind of made it look like there are these pathways in their habitat where they kind of tend to walk. And I really liked kind of taking different types of plants and raising and lowering them into the soil. So I was looking for kind of the right shrubs. I often couldn't find the right shrubs that I wanted to use to fill a certain space. And I discovered that I could sink trees right into the ground and then use the kind of tippy tops of the trees to kind of look like a shrub when it was lowered all the way down. So that was kind of cool. It opened up a whole new set of possibilities in terms of finding shrubs that worked for different habitats. After that, I finished putting in my null barrier and my habitat gate, always making sure to go back to my zoo and making sure it's zoned because obviously after I delete it all and I'm working on it, then it's not zoned anymore and I don't have a keeper assigned to it. And so I have to go back and check all of that, make sure that's all good, put my tapirs back into the habitat, and then check and see what they want in terms of grass, long grass, soil, and kind of just make those adjustments. And then I'm just plunking in some of those habitat enrichment items again, and always going back and covering up those barrier posts. So finding anything from the construction tools or construction items to cover up those posts, I think just tends to look better. And at this point, I wasn't putting top rails or bottom rails, I don't think, on the barrier sections, but even just covering up those posts make it look so much better. Here we are. Oh, too far. In the updated rebuild of our tapirs. They are pretty happy, I think. This little guy is playing with the boxes and the leaves. He seems pretty happy. This one over here has been swimming. Whoops. Oh. I'm trying to figure out how to do this. Okay. Oh, terrible. Oh, and let's see, does he go through? Right through, and can he walk all the way up? I'm not sure. I need to check the navigable area, but unfortunately I can't do that when I am recording. My little recording bar is covering that tool. So maybe there's a quick key I can look up and see if I can figure that out, but off video I will check and see if they can actually make their way all the way up here. If they can, that's great. If they can't, I might just take away some of this and just do this a little bit, change this a bit so they can get up here, because they need just a little bit more space to be happy. Aww. Very sweet. Okay, well, I think they're happy. I have a few things that I still need to do. Little touch-ups here and there, but I think that I like how this shelter turned out, looking very much like a wooded area. I'm not sure how this looks. I'm going to have to come back and look at it with fresh eyes. But other than that, I think the water turned out really great, and I like this wall. I'm going to be putting railing all along here, so that's going to cover up all of the side of this rail and platform. And here we go. And that's my new tapir habitat. All right, next time, let's zoom out. Oh my goodness, I had such a hard time with the barriers, and I deleted my Chinese pangolin barrier and my aardvark barrier several times trying to figure all that out. But anyway, so right now I just plopped back in a really quick mesh fence for my Chinese pangolin. So I guess this little guy is going to be my next rebuild.